Now, of course, in this application, in this first demo website which we're building here, it would make sense that we have a challenge for every month, not just for January and February. So therefore, what we could do is we could add more view functions, for example, also one for March, and then return a HTTP response here. And in March, we could maybe learn Django for at least 20 minutes every day. And we could do that for all months. So we do it for March, and we would also add a URL here for March. So we would add a new path here in the URL patterns where we point at views.march for the March URL. And we could do this for all months, but this, of course, will be quite cumbersome. We have to add 12 entries here to URL patterns, and we have to add 12 views here. And the good thing in this demo here is that we know how many entries we need. In a lot of other applications, you wouldn't have that luxury. Let's say you're building a blog where more and more blog posts are added over time. At the point of time you're writing this code, you might not know how many blog posts your users are going to add and which URLs they want for these blog posts. So often you have the scenario that you can't know all possible URLs in advance when you're building the application. And even if you do, in cases like this here with the months, it would be a lot of extra work to add all these extra view functions and all extra URL entries. Now, it would be better if we could instead kind of set this up dynamically. That we set up one URL pattern, which actually is dynamic regarding the concrete value here. If that's January, February, March, that it's dynamic regarding that. And that then we also have one view function, which is triggered for this dynamic URL and which is able to find out with which concrete value the URL was populated to then return a different response based on that value. Does this make sense? Let's take a closer look, because that is a common requirement you have in a lot of applications and also something which helps us here. We could, for example, create a new function here, which we name monthly challenge. And we get the request here, and now we want to return a HTTP response, but the text which we send with the response is not always the same, but instead depends on the month for which this function is executed. Now that's the next step. Let's first of all find out how we could wire up this function. In URLs py in the challenges folder, we could add a path where we actually don't hard code the month name, but instead we add a placeholder. And Django supports this and has a built-in placeholder syntax. You use angle brackets, so a smaller than and greater than sign, and in between any identifier of your choice. For example, month. But this is totally up to you, this text. Now, what this tells Django is that you don't care about the concrete value. This could be January, February, March, December, October. You don't care. But instead, you want to handle all URLs with any text after /challenges, which is still needed. But with any text thereafter, any URLs should be handled by views.monthly challenge. So by this new view function which we added. And with that, we can actually remove these other paths here and just have this one dynamic path with the dynamic path segment. And it's always this view here which will be triggered. Now, in this view, we now need to find out for which concrete path value this was triggered. So whether this function is executed because January was entered, February, or anything like that. So therefore, Django conveniently offers us a second argument which we receive here. And that's the month argument. It's month, and it's written exactly like this because I picked month as an identifier between the angle brackets. If you used a different identifier here, like just M or whatever, then you would have to use that different identifier here as an argument name. Because Django will pass in the concrete value, which is set here on the path, as a keyword argument to this view function. If you had multiple dynamic URL parameters, so multiple angle bracket statements here in one and the same URL, you could extract these different dynamic values by simply listing them by their name as parameters in the view function. So these act as keyword arguments which Django will use to forward the captured values for these dynamic parameters to the view function that is being executed. And in there, we could now check with the if statement, for example, if month is equal to January. And if it is, we then, for example, have a variable, which is our challenge text, which by default is none, let's say. And we then set this here equal to our January text. That's something we could do. And then we could repeat this for all months. So with elif, we could check if month is maybe equal to February. And if that's the case, we would set challenge text equal to this. And elif, if month is equal to March. And of course, I want to use double quotes everywhere to be consistent. Both would work in Python, but I want to be consistent. So if it's equal to March, I set challenge text equal to the March text here. And we can do this for every month now. And then at the end, check if else, if month is something else, then we want to do something else. Then we maybe don't want to send a response like this, but instead maybe want to send back a 404 response. And therefore here in the else case, we could return another object which we can import from Django HTTP. We can import the HTTP response not found. And that allows us to send back a 404 error. And with that here, we can return this response not found error and maybe set a value of this month is not supported. And otherwise, if we don't make it into this else block, so if we had a valid month, we send back a regular response, a success response, not an error response, with that challenge text which we populate for the respective months. And that's something we could do here. And with that, if we go back and we reload for January, we still see that value. We can also still visit February, and we can also visit March. But if I, for example, enter October here, this is not a value we're currently supporting with our if statement. I get back this month is not supported. And that's something we could do here. And now this is more dynamic with help of these dynamic path segments. And that is a super crucial feature without which you wouldn't be able to build many features which you need on web pages. And we're going to see this specific feature in action in many examples throughout the course. Of course, it means that now we can also get rid of the free view functions here, January, February, and March, and only go with the monthly challenge function, which now is called for whichever month is being entered. Of course, at the moment, we're not supporting more than these 3 months here, but being aware of these dynamic path segments is what I wanted to focus on now, and it is a super important feature.